dog lives in fluffy gardens. George lives here, at 8 Gruff Lane to be precise. Some people say that dogs are a man's best friend. That can be very true indeed. But George the mean yellow dog is nobody's best friend. He's not even anybody's worst friend. He is mean, loud, and always in a terrible mood. George hates everything and makes it his business to tell people so very loudly. If you drew a picture for George and showed it to him, he would say,
"I hate that picture,"
and make you feel very bad. George hates everything. Our story begins one bright morning in Gruff Lane. George had got out of the wrong side of the bed, just as he does every morning.
"Bah!"
shouted George.
"I hate morning time."
He ran to his window and looked to see if there was someone to blame for it being morning time. There wasn't anyone outside, so he shouted at the flowers.
"I hate morning time, and it's all your fault. Stupid flowers!"
He roared and made the flowers feel very bad. George really was in a terrible mood. After brushing his teeth, which he hated, George went downstairs for breakfast. George hated breakfast. He made himself some tea, which he hated, and toast, which he also hated. George ran to the window and saw a little penguin walking by.
"I hated my breakfast,"
he shouted, and made the penguin feel very bad indeed. Then George the mean yellow dog went for a drive in his car. George hated going for a drive in his car. Wee Reg the puppy was waiting to cross the road. He looked left and right, and when he saw it was safe to cross, he walked calmly across the road. That's when George zoomed up to him in his car and started beeping his horn in a temper. Beep, beep, beep.
"I hate when people cross the road,"
shouted George.
"Get off the road!"
Poor Wee Reg felt very bad as George roared at him and then drove off. Wee Reg thought that George needed to be taught a lesson, and so he went home and called up some of his friends. Later that day, George went to the egg shop to buy some eggs. George hates shopping, and he especially hates shopping for eggs. He brought some eggs to the counter where a small penguin was serving customers.
"I hate this shop, and I hate these eggs,"
roared George. The penguin smiled and said to George, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any eggs. This is a butcher's shop." George looked down at the eggs and got terribly confused.
"I said I hate this shop, and I hate these eggs,"
he repeated, even louder this time. The little penguin just smiled. "I'm sorry, sir." "Next, please," he said cheerfully, and served the next customer, Henny the hippopotamus, who wanted some eggs for a cheese omelette. George, very confused, threw down the eggs and stormed out of the shop in an awful huff. Then George went to the bakery to buy some bread. George hates shopping for bread even more than he hates shopping for eggs. He brought a loaf of bread to the counter and shouted at the small penguin baker,
"I hate this bakery, and I hate this bread."
The penguin just smiled and said, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have any bread. This is a fruit and veg shop," and served the next customer, Lenny the octopus, who wanted some bread for a jam sandwich. George got very flustered indeed when he saw the penguin give Lenny some bread. He stormed up to the penguin and demanded to know why Lenny had been able to buy bread when he couldn't buy any. The little penguin explained that only people who ask nicely will get what they want.
"I hate that,"
shouted George. Then he thought for a moment and asked in a quiet voice,
Please may I have some bread?
The penguin smiled and gave George his best loaf of bread. George didn't seem to hate this loaf. So he stormed out of the shop and went back to the egg shop. George began to shout,
I hate eggs!
But then he stopped and thought. He then asked in a quiet voice,
Please may I have some eggs?
The little penguin smiled and gave George the best eggs in the shop. George smiled for the first time that day. Actually, for the first time ever. It was the first time George had smiled in his whole life. And with a big smile on his face, George stormed right out of the egg shop and slammed the door and barged his way home. The little penguin called up Wee Reg right away to tell him that his plan had worked. Wee Reg wagged his little tail as the penguin told him all about it. Just then, the penguin was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was George. He had forgotten to do something. Thank you, he said quietly, and slammed the door.